I'm delighted to welcome back Ciaran Heffernan. I just looked up there. The last time Ciaran spoke was July 2024, and we had a huge amount of positive feedback on the talk. I think it's on the LinkedIn channel if you want to have a look at it. One of the best talks I've seen on just problem solving and the applications of problem solving and some of the methodologies and a couple of case studies within Tirlon went down really well. People got a lot out of it. A lot of people asked, can we get Ciaran back again? She's back again. He's not going to do the same talk again. As I say, you'll be able to see that video. If it's not there, I'll make sure we put it up. He's going to talk today about lean health. I've no idea what he's going to say, but if it's not like the last, no pressure, Ciaran. If it's not like the last talk, it should be really well worth your lunchtime. So without further ado, I am going to pass the baton over to Ciaran, and looking forward to it.
Thank you. So, so look, thanks for the introduction, Steve. So, look, my name is Ciaran Heffernan, and Steve mentioned, nearly 2 years ago, I was here last talking about problem solving, and specifically within Tirlon, the organisation I work for. I've taken a bit of a different approach this time, and my presentation is going to be covering a systems-based approach to health and resilience, right? So, it's about taking the lean and OpEx tools that hopefully you're all familiar with, and applying them to the most important process that you'll ever manage, right, which is your health. I want to kick off with a question. The question is, if your health were a manufacturing process, would you be comfortable with how it's currently being managed? We know in manufacturing that things don't typically fail overnight, right? What happens is standards drift over time, you get variation setting in, and eventually the system starts to degrade, and then you get a failure, right? And it can seem like it was an overnight disaster, but in reality, these things drift and happen over time. But health is no different, right? But there is a gap because in operations, we have all these tools and systems, right? So we use strategy deployment to make sure there's clarity and alignment across the organization. We have standard work to make sure that we reduce variation, and performance management to know if we're winning or losing, right? And when things go wrong, we use problem solving to identify the root cause, to implement corrective and preventative action. When it comes to our health, we typically don't have the same structure and rigor in place. And I know this, right, because this was me most of my life. I started my career, I did an engineering degree in CIT in 2011, and I moved into process and project engineering, and then eventually reliability engineering. And in 2018, then I did a master's in OpEx, and I moved full-time into kind of OpEx and lean roles. But throughout this time, I was dealing with a lot of my own health challenges, right? So since I was a child, I'd say I had quite a weak immune system. I had asthma, I get regular head colds, they turn into sinus and chest infections, and I get tonsillitis, very regularly. And then in my early 20s, I suffered from kind of an ongoing inflammatory issue that left me in a lot of pain and looking for answers. I eventually ended up in one of the top consultants up in the Beacon Clinic, and he basically told me that the only path forward he could see for me was pain management, right? Which, as you can imagine, in my early 20s, that left me really deflated, right? Now, luckily, that eventually subsided, but throughout my 20s, I'd say I suffered from stress, anxiety, heart palpitations, and I spent a lot of time looking for answers and solutions. Eventually, I kind of had this realization, right? Compared to my job, where I was using systems and tools and structures, I was managing my health really poorly. I had no system. I was outsourcing decisions. I was basically managing symptoms, right? I wasn't thinking about root cause, and I wasn't using systems thinking. So this eventually led me down a path of kind of self-learning, and it became a real interest and a passion of mine. So then last year, I started training in holistic health through the Czech Institute, really, so I could start furthering my own knowledge, but start helping other people as well, right? Now, what I found is that most people don't lack discipline or desire. What they lack is structure and standards, right? And as lean and OpEx professionals, this is really our bread and butter, okay? What I'm going to cover today is how you take something vague, like I should probably be healthier, right? And how you turn it into something that you know already how to do, which is managing the system. First, I'm going to show you why health operates like a manufacturing system. So we have inputs, processes, and outputs, and why most health interventions fail because they only focus on the output. Secondly, then, how to identify the biggest constraint that's limiting your health, and why trying to fix everything simultaneously guarantees failure, right? And then finally, a simple daily execution system, right? So a PDCA cycle that takes 1 minute a day and will get you results without relying on motivation. And by the end of it, I'm hoping that you'll have a framework that you can apply immediately, basically to any area of your life to get improvement. What does health mean to you, right? Every successful organization has a mission, a vision, values. Because without them, there's no alignment, right? And this ultimately sets them up for failure. Health is no different. So without clarity on our values, decisions are going to get made in the moment, right? They get made based on stress, convenience, and emotion. And this is going to lead to poor outcomes, to chronic disease, right? So what does health mean to you, right? For some people, it's performance. For others, it's longevity, maybe. For anyone in pain or with an illness, it's just to be well again. For me, it's about being around for my kids, right? I have 2 young daughters, 6 and 3. It's about having the energy and the capability to do the things that I love to do in life. It's about being able to move without pain, to think clearly, and to tolerate and recover from stress, okay? So this is my kind of North Star. And this is a big priority in my life, and everything that I do, serves that mission. But it's really important that you know your why, because changing habits, especially, habits that are maybe old and well ingrained, it requires a lot of force and momentum to overcome. So without a strong why, you really just risk falling back into your old patterns. So it's critical, right? I mentioned that health can be viewed of like a manufacturing system. In manufacturing, you have raw materials and they flow through, plant and machinery. And the outcome is we have finished goods. Well, health is very similar, right? So we've got inputs, things like, nutrition, sleep, light, movement, stress, and they flow through the body's systems and processes, and we get an output, which, hopefully it's high energy, good mood, resilience, body composition. So it's a very similar structure, right? Just a different domain. But while manufacturing is very complex, in my view, it doesn't have a patch on the body, right? To give an example, we have roughly 37 trillion cells in our bodies, right? And each one carries out thousands of biochemical reactions per second. We have 11 different systems, you can see here, right? The circulatory, the lymphatic, respiratory, etc. And they all have their own vital function, but they work together as a collective to maintain the health and the efficiency of the body as a whole, right? Now, I find this absolutely fascinating. But the point I want to make is that health requires the interaction of many elements, right? And this is basically the essence of holistic and integrated medicine. But there's a problem in Western medicine insofar as it's very much about specialization. So doctors typically move up their career by specializing in smaller and smaller areas of the body, right? So they become consultants. Now, don't get me wrong, this is brilliant for like acute care and for trauma, right? But for overall health and resilience, it's too siloed. It's like your single office model, right, instead of your open plan. The other issue is GPs are under a lot of pressure. So like the standard appointment for a GP is about 10 to 15 minutes, say. In that time, they're supposed to assess your complaint, review your history, diagnose, prescribe, and document the case. So they don't really have time to look upstream, and as a result, they're forced to deal with symptoms. Like if I was to give you an example, I mentioned I used to get a lot of colds, and they turn into sinus infections, sometimes chest infections, pretty much every year, right? Like clockwork, come kind of into the winter time. The solution was always the same. So antibiotics, sometimes I get given steroids. But not once did well, at least I don't remember ever a doctor digging deeper to understand how my system was functioning. So what were my inputs? And every year I got the same prescription, but there was no root cause identified, no corrective action, right? What's even worse in my mind is when I think I was 16 or 17, I had my tonsils removed. So the tonsils are a core part of your immune system. Now I believe they were removed because, again, nobody addressed the root cause behind why they were chronically inflamed. So, like, I'm really grateful for the medical system. When I'm sick or my daughters are sick, I'm the first to run into the doctor and all that is brilliant. But we do need to just acknowledge its limitations. And in order to be preventative, in order to really maximize your health, you need to lead the charge, right? You have to own it. Most health interventions, they spray out the weeds, whereas we're here to try and tend the soil, okay? You don't want to be on the right here. You want to be focused on the left, lifestyle changes. I promised I'd bring it back to lean, right? So I won't let you down. In lean, we have 5 principles: focus on value, map the value stream, create flow, pull, and pursue perfection. So I'll touch on them all as we go through this presentation. But the first is focus on value and eliminate waste, right? In health, value is anything that enhances your health span. So that's the years you live with your health intact, right? Whereas waste is anything that detracts from it. Now, how do we determine what's good and bad for us? Well, there's actually a useful lens to look through that we can take directly from problem solving, right? Which is my other kind of passion. If we had 2 identical production lines, the one on the left is running really well, consistently hitting target. The other on the right isn't, right? What would you do? Some of you might say we'd study the difference between them, right? We'd look at the inputs, the environment, maybe the shift pattern. If they're 2 identical machines, the answer or the solution is probably in the distinction somewhere, right? So this is a basic problem-solving tool called is-not. It's very simple, but it can actually solve some of the most complex problems in the world, right? And the same principle can be applied to health. So here we have 2 hunter-gatherer populations, the Hads and the Sane, right? They have the lowest rates of heart disease ever recorded in the world. Much lower rates of chronic disease as well compared to Western populations. Now, why is this, right? I believe it's because they're operating to their standard, okay? So these are the conditions that our bodies evolved under. Despite the body being very complex, the solution, I think, is quite simple, right? It's not easy now, but it is simple. Our ancestors ate whole seasonal food, right? They walked 15, 20,000 steps a day. They lived under natural light cycles. They didn't have chronic stress. They had strong social bonds, and they spent most of their time outdoors. Now, I think we all know what the modern reality is, right? We have supermarkets that are packed with ultra-processed food. Easter, Halloween, Christmas, they've been hijacked basically by the junk food business, in my view. Financial stress, artificial light at night, exams, sitting 8 hours a day is incredibly stressful on the body, right? So it's no surprise to me that chronic disease is on the rise and we have mental health issues that are so prevalent, right? And the solution is not to abandon modern life. I mentioned modern healthcare is amazing, right? We have all these wonderful life-saving drugs, health interventions available to us. But the solution is to try and engineer our life and our environment, to try and minimize the gap between our current state and our standard. We want to try and remove as much of the waste as possible and focus on the value add. So we keep the best of modern life, but we shape daily life, movement, life, food, etc., to try and make chronic disease rare again. Now, one of the biggest issues I see in my own life, but also with clients, is confusion and decision fatigue, mainly driven by social media, right? Just let me give you an example of what an average day looks like scrolling social media, if you follow anything in the health space. So intermittent fasting promotes autophagy. No, it wrecks your metabolism. You need to be in the gym 6 days a week. No, overtraining is why you're tired. Carbs make you gain weight. No, you need carbs for energy. Sleep 8 hours a minimum. No, you only need 5 hours. The most successful people only get 5 hours sleep. This supplement will improve your life. Supplements are full of toxins. So that's what scrolling social media feels like, right? It's designed to keep you clicking, buying, doubting. And every piece of information burns energy, creates doubt, and ultimately opens the door to quitting. People just go, I'm just going to check out of this. But this is the opposite of the fourth principle of lean, which is pull. Okay. In manufacturing, pull means producing only what's needed based on real demand, just in time. For health, it means understanding the data, letting the numbers and the body steer you. So it's about being data driven, not guessing, not reacting to every fad. Now, how do we overcome this, right? If we go back to our 5 lean principles, we already discussed value, right? So you're on the hook. What comes after value? What's the second lean principle?
Oh gosh, well, reducing waste would come to mind for me.
Teresa has it there in the chat, so it's map, right? So we map the process. Well done. So yeah, look, we map the system, right? And the key part is we look at the core inputs. These inputs that I'll show you here, okay, so they're not random. There are 7 inputs that drive energy, immunity, hormone balance, and resilience. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's not far from it as well either. So you'll see in the table we've got the 7 inputs, so sleep, nutrition, hydration, breathing, movement, light, and thinking. And each one of these is foundational for our health. They're all required to, for the body to be resilient. And beside each one, then I've listed the standard and the impact if it's not met, right? I won't go through it in detail because I don't have the time, but what I'll do is I'll just snip it and shove it in the chat for you. So the idea is that we map where we are with each of these in our own life. And we want to understand which one of them is out of alignment with our biological standard. Now, for most of these, we can get objective measurements, right? So for like sleep, we can measure sleep duration, quality. For nutrition, we can measure, nutrition quality, consistency. We can measure step count. A lot of these can be measured with apps and wearables. And the goal isn't to try and improve anything. It's just to gather the data and get an understanding. What are your core inputs and are they meeting a minimum standard? And to give you an example, right, most people have no idea if they're meeting their basic nutritional needs, things like fiber, potassium, omega-3. But like most people are taking some sort of vitamin or supplement. So they get sold a product, but they have no idea and no data if they have a nutritional gap or not. And in reality, if you logged your food for just 2 weeks and use an app like Chronometer, for example, it'll give you more information about your diet than most people get in a lifetime. And it gives you the data to make informed decisions then around diet changes and supplements. So this is really a data-first approach. And it's not that we want to track all this forever, but like any CI or problem-solving initiative, the first step is always to establish the current state. And most people are trying to just optimize outputs without assessing the downstream components, right? And we wouldn't make that mistake in work, so we shouldn't make it with our own health. Now, once you've gathered sufficient amounts of data, you're going to start seeing opportunities. But it's very important that we don't try and just fix everything at once, right? This is where we can rob another core idea from OPEX, which is the theory of constraints. Some of you will know what the TOC is, but anyone who's not familiar with it, there's a great book called The Goal. I can't remember who the author is, but it's basically about a guy called Alex, and he runs a factory, and the factory's in constant backlog. It's basically in crisis mode, and it's on the brink of being shut down. So he tries everything to improve the efficiency of the factory as a whole, but it doesn't improve the backlog. In fact, it just keeps getting worse. So eventually he gets in touch with a consultant who basically tells him one simple truth, that the factory's throughput is determined by one single thing, and that's its constraint, right, or its bottleneck. And you can improve the entire factory, but it won't make the slightest difference if you don't improve the bottleneck. So once he figures this out, basically everything changes, right? Now, every system has a constraint, and health is no different. But this is where most people go wrong. They try and fix everything at once. So they train harder, they eat cleaner, they're trying to reduce stress, they're taking a raft of supplements. And at the same time, this is very inefficient, right? It typically doesn't stick. it leads to people getting overwhelmed. Instead, the theory of constraints says identify the one thing that's holding the system back the most and focus there. You can see some common constraints there: sleep, stress, nutrition. But you let the data guide you, right? You probably know intuitively. So if I give you 10 seconds just to eyeball this, right? Which one are you neglecting the most? Whichever one jumps out at you, it's probably a bottleneck, right? Focus there. Everything else should become secondary. I was just going to say, is there anyone brave enough to put it in the chat? Steve, you've already beat me to it. Steve says hydration. Adam, light. Yeah, so look, a lot of you have an intuitive sense. Sleep's a big one. Sleep gets impacted by so many things in modern life. A lot of hydration, yeah. I have a little thing I cross off every day when I drink a glass of water. It's hanging on my kitchen. So look, let me show you what this looks like in practice. A bit of a case study, right? So a client I work with, we'll call him Mark. He works in a high stress job. He's got a young family, real type A personality, right? Very driven. He came to me because he wanted to lose weight. And his approach, given his personality type, was just to train harder, right? So he was in the gym 5-6 days a week, pushing himself. We dug a bit deeper, and what we could see is that his immune system was actually suffering, right? He was getting doses much more common, and they were lasting a lot longer, turning into infections and stuff. And after an initial assessment, we could see that his body was actually under a lot of stress. His outputs weren't the problem, right? The symptoms that he was experiencing were just a result of his body under significant stress due to unstable inputs. And him doing more was actually making it much worse, right? So his constraint was basically a lack of recovery. So we didn't try and fix everything, right? We defined an 8-week program for him. We defined just 4 behaviors. So consistent bedtime window, an earlier evening meal, a wind down process before bed, and reduced processed food. So this was his standard work, right? Now within 4 weeks, his sleep consistency improved. He had more energy in the morning. His stress was down and his weight was down. And once his recovery improved, his food choices started to become less reactive. His stress felt more manageable, even though his workload hadn't changed, right? So after this, then we moved to nutrition. And after 12 weeks, he started seeing a huge improvement in his immune system. And the thing is, everything's connected, right? The body's an interconnected system. Your nervous system and your immune system are directly linked. If you're under chronic stress, it doesn't just affect your mind, it's going to weaken your immune system. If you're not getting enough sleep, that's not just going to make you tired, right? It's going to affect core hormones like insulin and cortisol. And if your gut's under pressure, it's going to have an impact on your mental health, right? The gut microbiome impacts your brain chemistry. So while everything's connected, we need to see, systems thinking tells us to see things as the whole. And the good thing about this is if you fix one thing, like if you fix sleep, your energy is going to improve, your food choices are going to get easier, your training is going to become more effective. If you reduce stress, your digestion is going to improve, your sleep's going to get better, your recovery is going to accelerate. And if you stabilize your blood sugar, you're going to find that your mood is better, your cravings are going to reduce, and your energy becomes more consistent, right? So there's a cascade effect here. Address one constraint and you'll find everything downstream improves. Once you've identified your constraint, you define your behaviors, okay? In Mark's case, we defined 4. But where do you go from here, right? Now, this is typically where most people fail, generally for 2 reasons. Number 1, they get overzealous and they try and do too much, right? I already mentioned that. The other one is that they rely on motivation. Motivation is brilliant for starting, right? But it's terrible for sustaining. So in order to solve this, we're going to rob another tool from OPEX that you're all hopefully familiar with, which is PDCA. But first, I just want to give you a quick story that kind of captures the essence of this, right? So a guy named Greg, and I read about this story online, I thought it was brilliant. He wanted to lose weight, right? He lived beside a running trail, but he hated running. So instead of forcing himself to go running, he took a step back and he asked a different question. He said, how could I make myself enjoy running? So he dove into the research around habit formation and behavioral change. And he came up with a really simple plan, right? So day one, he was to put his running shoes by the door. Super, easy. Day two, he is to go for a run, but for only 5 minutes at a pace that he could sustain for an hour, right? Also easy. Day three, he actually gave himself a day off, right? Because day two was such hard work. Day four, he went for a run, but this time for 6 minutes. Again, at the same pace, right? So super easy. Every run he did was well within his capability. And after each one, he got a sense of accomplishment and that he had done what he'd set out to do. But by day 30, he ran his first mile, right? And to his surprise, he actually really enjoyed it and he looked forward to going again. So he used this approach then to focus on his sleep and his diet. And he didn't rely on motivation, right? He engineered the inputs. He ran these PDCA feedback loops and he basically applied Kaizen to his own life, to his health. Now, this is something you all know how to do because you do it every day at work. It's the same principle, just applied to behavioral change. But I want you to contrast this with the average New Year's resolution, right? We go from couch potato to I'm going on a strict diet and I want to do a HIIT class twice a week, right? It's painful and it doesn't stick. So what does PDCA look like in this context? Well, there's 4 steps. The first is we plan, right? And this comes directly from your constraint. So what are the 3 or 4 behaviors that would impact your constraint? My constraint, for example, has always been my nervous system, right? So anxiety, stress. So every day I commit to 15 minutes of breath work in the morning. I go for a walk. And because I've learned that my nervous system is so linked to my body, right? I do 10 minutes of stretching. But if I do those 3 things every day, it keeps my constraint under control. And they form the bedrock of my standard work. Once you've established your plan, right, whatever your behaviors are, you do it, right? You execute it. You don't judge, you just do. And by the end of the day, then you check. Did you do the thing or not, right? You track it, yes or no. This takes 30 seconds. Finally, then you act. So what's one small adjustment you can make tomorrow to improve? This is about tiny daily changes to either improve your adherence or to maybe slightly increase the commitment. Remember, we start really small, right? So, for example, if you're trying to increase your steps, maybe add an additional 100 steps every day. If you didn't hit your target, you might assess, well, why didn't I hit it? What needs to change tomorrow for that to happen? If you're going to bed too late, can you organize yourself better? If you've got digestive issues after dinner, what did you eat? Maybe you need to try something new tomorrow, or maybe you need to start a food journal. But the thing is, you don't do 10 things, right? You just pick one, write it down, and that should only take you another 30 seconds to a minute. So your total time here is just a minute. Now, here's an example of what this looks like in practice. Here's a client who is just focused on weight loss, right? So we defined 4 behaviors. He weighs himself in the morning, he tracks his protein, he tracks his calories, and he tracks his steps. You can see some days are perfect, right? See green, other days they're not. But the key thing is that he's learning and he's building lasting habits and he's learning about systems within his own life, right? He now knows what a performance management system looks like. This is his daily stand-up meeting. The thing is, like, day to day, something like this can seem really trivial. But if you do this for 6 to 9 months, it can be really transformational, right? Like any performance system, we also need weekly reviews, okay? So every Sunday, for instance, you take 5-10 minutes. What patterns emerged? What helped adherence? What got in the way? What's one adjustment you can make next week? You're not judging yourself, you're just analysing your system. But this is really your opportunity to take a step back and consider maybe some of the larger changes you can make to support your goals. Because for behaviours to be successful, you need to create flow, right? This is the 3rd lean principle. And flow means reducing friction between intention and action. It's about trying to optimise your environment so that the habits that you want come easy. For an example, you might want to buy yourself a new pair of runners, right? Maybe a better mattress. So leverage materialism to try and improve the quality of your life, not to take away from it, right? To try and incentivize yourself to do more of what you want to do. If you're dealing with stress, maybe you create a space for recovery. So a chair in a room, a mat on the floor, just a dedicated space, right? Because your environment triggers your behaviors. If it's nutrition that you're going after, forget about willpower, right? It does not work. Remove all the ultra-processed food from the house. When you go shopping, just don't buy it, okay? If it's not there, you can't eat it. If it's movement, maybe you need to buy yourself a stand-up desk. And maybe you need to get organised with your gym clothes. Park at the end of the car park. Anytime you go somewhere, you get more steps in. But this is the difference between hoping for behavioural change and engineering it. This is basically 5S, okay? You're not relying on motivation or willpower, it's process design. Every month then, you might ask yourself, well, has my constraint improved? Am I sleeping better? Has my stress reduced? If it has, you move on to the next thing, right? Maybe move on to nutrition or movement. If it hasn't, maybe you need to take a step back and reassess. Is it really your constraint, or maybe you need to do something different? But the key is, this is the 5th lean principle in action, which is pursue perfection. And the reason this works, you all know why this works, because you see it in your work, right? But it's your plan, so there's ownership and visibility. You're reducing cognitive load and decision fatigue. You're replacing motivation with structure. And you're moving away from compliance to feedback and learning, right? It reframes getting healthy from something that's just compliance-based to you're almost gamifying it, right? And the critical piece is you're compounding small wins, right? Imagine what happens if you implement one new positive, healthy habit a month for the rest of your life. It's shocking, right? The results that you can get. So for all the same reasons that CI works in operations, that's why this works. This is a video I came across yesterday. I had to put it in and play it to you. So
now watch. Hands here now. Hands here on your chest. Hands on your chest. Hands out. Hands out. Hands above your head. Come there. Then this way. Then this way, because you're always swinging right-handed. So now I'm pulling my spine left-handed. So I'm going the opposite way of hitting a golf ball. This way. And then fast, 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 fast. Then slow. 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 And breathe. Those are important.
does anybody know who that is?
Is it Gary Player, the golfer? He's 80 or 90 or something like that.
He's 91.
Yep. Gary Player, 91, yeah.
91. Right. So like when I see that, I'm buzzing. And I think it just sets the limit, in terms of the kind of life you can be living later in life nowadays if you look after yourself. But yeah, that's what gets me going every day. Just to think that I could have that kind of quality of life. Maybe not at his age, but even in my 70s and 80s. Yeah, it is Gary Player. Yeah, I only knew he existed yesterday. I don't follow golf, but I just saw this video and somebody saying he was 91. I was shocked. So there's 4 things I want to leave you with. Number 1 is have a clear vision, right? Mine is Gary Player there, right? Know your why, because your values are going to drive your behaviors, and they're going to drive your results. Number 2, health operates like a manufacturing system, right? You have inputs that flow through processes to produce outputs. Most health interventions fail because they only focus on the outputs, right? If the inputs are unstable, you can forget about the outputs. Stabilize the inputs and you give the processes what they need, right? And the outputs will improve. Number 3, systems always have constraints. So your job isn't to fix everything, it's to identify the bottleneck and focus there, right? For most people, it's recovery, stress, nutrition, We saw hydration came a lot there in the chat. But once you elevate that constraint, right, everything downstream gets easier. And number 4 then, so sustainable execution requires systems, not motivation. So daily PDCA, 1 minute a day, track your standard, make one small adjustment, and complete your weekly review then to try and engineer your environment for success. Every month then, reevaluate and focus there. The tools and the systems you use every day, right? So lean principles, theory constraints, problem solving, PDCA, standard work, they can be used to improve all areas of your life. Finances is one that comes to mind, right? Same system. You identify constraint, define your behaviors. Maybe you track that weekly or monthly, right? Depending on what the behaviors are. If you're learning a new skill, I was on the phone with Steve there maybe 2 weeks ago at this stage, and Steve was saying that he had used PDCA to improve his golf game, right? But the thing is that health is the process where we have the most to lose, but the most to gain. So if you're not applying your skills to that domain, you're leaving money on the table, right? Thanks very much for listening. Before I leave you go, I just want to mention 3 things, right? So I write articles and share content on LinkedIn. So if you want kind of a deeper dive into anything we discussed, give me a connection request there. I wrote an article as well on the 7 inputs in more depth. So if you want to kind of understand those and maybe some of the why behind each of them, you can find a link there as well. And the other thing is, for anyone on this call who maybe needs a bit more support in digging into their specific situation, I'm offering a free 30-minute consult as well to anybody who needs it. So just get in touch with me through my email. So that's it. Happy to take any questions, or we can just kind of have an open chat.
I think you can say why we had him back now. That was excellent. Again, I just think it's a great use of the lunchtime, something that we wouldn't all think about.
Yep. Ciaran, thanks a million. That's fantastic. My question really is one, which is better, do you think? Is it Mars or Milky Way? Somebody left this table full of sweets in front of me before this call. I didn't touch them.
I think you know my answer to that, Brian.
Yes, I do.
Look, it's a constant battle. Like, I have 2 young kids, a 6 and a 3-year-old, and the way the world has engineered itself, you're just trying to bat it away constantly. It's a losing battle, but neither of them are great. But if you need a little pick me up and it makes you feel happier, then maybe it's worth it.
The question I have is around habits. I mean, I find habits are the hardest thing to break, and obviously in a working environment, a lot of the bad practice that we see is because of legacy habits. So listen, I suffer from type 2 diabetes, and I was only diagnosed in late 40s, but I still find it very hard to break habits. So I like a cup of tea and a biscuit. So just sort of, how do you break a habit that you're so familiar with all your life to try and improve?
I don't know, set yourself up a little daily performance management meeting there, Richie, and every time you go a day without a biscuit, give yourself a green tick. You know, you'd be surprised at how much you'll want to fight for that green tick every day. But like, can you substitute it for something else? You know, fair enough, you want a cup of tea and a biscuit, but maybe you can have a cup of tea with an alternative to a biscuit. There's lots of choices out there. So I think if that's your weak link or your Achilles heel, I'm sure we can come up with a solution for you there.
Yeah, great presentation, Ciaran. Thanks a million. Just curious on the importance. I know what you're saying about motivation is great for getting you going, but not for sustaining the habit or the thing you're trying to develop. But what about targets? How important are targets, and keeping them realistic? Like, so you could, like you're saying, like the first target should be put the runners by the door. But if you sit down and say, like, right, I ultimately want to run a marathon, like, how do you manage those targets if you're coming from zero? Like,
yeah, I suppose ultimately, if a target is going to motivate you, and there's lots of people that are driven by targets, they really want to achieve a goal. And if it's to run a marathon, for instance, you just need to backward plan, the same as you would with anything, really. Well, so, okay, you need to run a marathon. What does that require from you in terms of physical capability, in terms of aerobic capacity? and then you try and work back from there. A marathon, it starts with a mile, a 5K, a 10K, a half, and then a full. So you're trying to set incremental goals that will give you small, easy wins throughout the process. Like if somebody's very unfit, I want to run a marathon, it's going to take you 3 years. Like that's too big of a goal to be trying to set yourself. So you need to backward plan it and say, well, look, this year, maybe you run a 5K, for instance, and you work towards it that way. But yeah, I think it depends on the person, really. Some people are very driven by targets. Other people aren't. But really, I suppose what I'm trying to get you to see here is that you can put a system in place, regardless whether you're target driven or not, and the system will ultimately run it for you, as opposed to relying on motivation and trying to make daily decisions. It's all about being systems based.
Yeah, quick question. So obviously it can be really good to easily motivate yourself and keep yourself on track. Any tips for how to keep a team on track, particularly one that has a lot of teenagers in it?
I think you could probably use a similar kind of model. I mean, ask yourself, well, what are the daily wins that you're setting for them, and is there direct feedback and kind of visibility of whether we're executing or not? What does a winning a day look like for you? Because if you can win a day and you can track that, ultimately you win many days, you win the week. Win many weeks, you win the month. So try and distill it down to what does a good day look like, and what's the system around performance managing a day look like. And it might be just 3 or 4 things, but you'd be shocked, like when you put something up in front of people and say, if we do this today, we're green. If we don't, we're red. It fires people up, and 80% of the people will be motivated enough to deliver based on that alone. But if you do nothing, you're really just flying by the seat of your pants. So look, I don't have a lot of experience coaching underage sports teams or anything, but that's probably my 2 cents to you. I'm sure there's other people on the call that probably do. They'll probably be able to add to that.
There's probably a few coaches on the call.
We have we've got quite a diverse age range on our Camoga team, from like 16, 17-year-olds all the way up to 50-year-olds. So it's a bit of a challenging one. Yeah, it's hard when you fall into the L1 category.
Yeah, thanks a million. Listen, I really enjoyed that, Ciaran and everyone else who organised it. And I'm just trying to get into the lean space work-wise. I've kind of always worked in a lean way, kind of in theory, but not, I've just done the lean yellow belt. And I just found it really, really helpful, because I ran a marathon as a 50-year-old a couple of years ago, and hearing, probably could have done with this call then, but I love the whole theory of putting lean into that kind of exercise health, and I just found that really, really helpful. And then obviously it's helping me learn more about lean in relation to work as well. So yeah, that's really all I wanted to say is thank you very much for today. And a colleague shared the link with me during the week, and yeah, so I've joined the network now, and thank you.
I'm delighted you came.
Yeah,
I think like lean is so transferable. I think it was Tom Hughes was involved in a webinar a few years ago. I think it was through Paul Akers, isn't it, that was doing webinars. And what was the name of the company? It was a technology company that he was taking us through as part of the webinar. But they had their 5 lean principles, but they completely changed it to suit their business. And I remember just thinking, yes, like that's the way, because so often we just try and take the principles at face value and shove them in, or say the 7 wastes, for instance, or the 8 wastes. But they had created their own wastes, and they just kind of changed it in a way that it was meaningful to them and to their business. And I think you can do that to all areas of life and business, but also habits and health and finances and whatever you want. So I'm still trying to figure out how to do it with my children, mind you, right? So that's the next.
You never get there. You never get there.
Yeah.
You mentioned Paul Akers. He actually he wrote a book around lean health, and all based around 2-second lean, like small little improvements. It's free if you go into the Lean Play app. I think the book is on there. You'll also see Tom Hughes's book, Improvement Starts with I, and he's the guy behind Gamba Docs. So they're all free resources on your phone. Just download Lean Play, and you'll find that. I see Robert's got his hand up.
Hey, Robert.
Thanks to the Dublin Network. Great event again. I like a fundamental thing around a lot of Lean that we do is that it's data driven. So even there, like, you know, on your checklist, like, you know, just measuring, and then you had your trend graphing, like, you know, brought back to kind of Richard Keegan's, you know, getting started on Lean, like with process management, simple statistics, like, you know, that it can be just like, you know, nothing hard to do, not putting another constraint in your way, that it doesn't have to be 6S type stuff, like, you know, but that it can be very, very simple data gathering and data analysis, like a trend, like, I mean, up and down, like, you know. But I think it is important then, exactly, that it is scientific thinking, it is data driven, that underpins a lot of what we do as well. So you become objective rather than subjective. And I think then it's a funny space that you're in, like around a lot of the health and well-being, nutrition and physical stuff like that. For me, I get an awful sense that an awful lot of it is quasi-science stuff. And that we need to be really careful in how we view stuff, whatever is kind of written in, like, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there and a lot of people pushing agendas, pushing products and pushing whatever. And that I think is good to bring you kind of
the model I always kind of, that I always use is like there's a guy who was a bit of a, I look up to Paul Check's his name. He runs the Check Academy that I train through. But even your man that I showed you there, Gary Player, and I've countless others, you know, that are kind of elders but are living it, and they're real examples of health. If you don't have what I want, I'm not going to listen to you. There's so many academics and people running companies that are telling you this is how to be healthy, but you look at them and they don't model health. They might be or they might not be healthy, but I think you need to have that razor sharp approach. If they don't have what you want, probably don't listen to them, because everybody has an opinion in this space. And even, you know, the science is on rocky or on fairly sandy ground, I would say, a lot of the time when you look into it. So you need to be very careful what you kind of believe. Always kick the tires, and look at who has what you want. That's my only advice.
Ciaran, that was absolutely fantastic. It's gonna be posted up on the YouTube channel. Thanks a million, everybody.
Thanks, lads.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks, Ciaran. Thanks.
Bye-bye.